Alan Tate was a confrere of Walker Percy's, if I'm not mistaken, according to that article. And I think I knew that from way back when I fell in love with Walker Percy's stuff. And I also read Alan Tate when I was studying there as a graduate student in the University of Dallas, and that's where I came across his concept of the angelic imagination, which I thought was a good.
Of Alan Tate's. All I'd really read of Alan Tate's was his biography of Jackson.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Tell me about that.
Well, it's called Stonewall Jackson, the Good Soldier is the title. And
Wow.
remember, it was many years ago that I was reading it, but he was the first one to get it done. It was. And how complicated the situation he was in, because a lot of people either revere him because of his military ability, which was amazing, or else they revile him because he fought for the Confederacy.
Oh.
But I had known that he was opposed to slavery, which is quite interesting.
It is.
His father had been a slave, but Jack was opposed to slavery, and was one of the people who was fighting for the Confederacy because he thought that the Union intended to enslave everyone.
Yeah, I think there are a number of people in the Confederate Army, maybe even the Confederate culture, Southern culture, who either didn't like slavery, the institution, or were out and out opposed to it. But I tend to think that the majority of them had their loyalties to their states outweighed that.
Yeah. Slavery was big for the very, very wealthy of the South.
Yeah.
And it was as widely accepted as we are with just assuming that the garbage men will show up without thinking about who they are.
Yeah.
I think there were a lot of people who didn't really think that there was any reason to have slavery, or that they thought it was unfair. If not to the slaves, but to them.
Yep.
To all the small people.
That's a good point. I think that there are a lot of small people in the South who probably thought that they couldn't make it big in the world because they didn't have the credit system. They didn't have the access to slaves, even if they wanted them, and they probably didn't want them anyway.
No, because I mean it's a burden.
Yep. Yes, it's a burden like any other resource, right?
And they were too small for that. I'm not saying that makes them especially moral, but it does mean that they're not snidely whiplash.
Yeah, and you're also saying that history is complex.
Yes, it is. You get some very complicated stories
Yeah.
with what's actually happening with people.
Yep. Longstreet.
That's true.
Longstreet is my man. I really like Longstreet.
Talk about Pete Longstreet.
Well, Gloomy Pete, right? And he was a classmate of those other chaps. So he grew up with Lou Armistead and with Meade and with several others. He came up in the class with them. Maybe not Meade. Meade was a little older. But my point being is that he was with all those guys that he was fighting with and against. And he himself opposed slavery, thought it was immoral. But he, like many of these men, saw his state, which I think was Virginia, he saw his state and the community that he lived in being the most important thing to him. And so when he had graduated from VMI, is that right? Yeah, from VMI.
I think Longstreet was from Texas, I think.
Was he? Okay. Well, that's even more interesting because Texas was actually very pro-slavery.
Yeah.
But,
and I think he was at the U.S. Military Academy.
That's right. He was at the U.S. Military Academy. And it's after the war that he becomes most interesting to me because he becomes a missionary to Africa. He converted to Catholicism, I guess, or he was Catholic, one or the other, and he became a Catholic missionary to Africa.
No, I didn't know that about him at all.
It's kind of cool.
I knew that Sherman was a Catholic. I didn't
Sherman,
know
yeah.
Longstreet became Catholic. Oh, yeah, Sherman was a Catholic.
Yeah, that's something you don't really think about.
Person.
It's something you don't really think about when you're taught history, especially taught history of the Civil War. You think these are men in gray or men in blue, but you don't think that they're actual men. who actually
Yeah.
had interests and idiosyncrasies and conflicted emotions and were part of a religion. Any more, any more than you think about the fact that the majority of the slaves coming over were also Christians and didn't speak English, at least up until a certain point. I mean, they spoke it after the slave trade was ended, before the war.
Yeah.
But they were Christians.
From first to last.
It's terribly tragic. There's no doubt about that. I just find it interesting that it was so complicated. It wasn't just all the Africans were good, native sort of pagans, and all the Southerners were snidely whiplashes, and all the Northerners were saints. It's like,
I will say
no.
that most of the people actually doing the slave trading were snidely whiplash types. They were pretty awful breed.
They seem to have been somewhat bad, yes. But their concept had to be that what they were dealing with was product in order to function. You can't run a business like that without thinking of your people as product and not people.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because a lot of times people don't realize that in order to treat people as slaves, you have to demonize them in your own mind.
Yeah, dehumanize completely.
The reason I find that significant is that we are having this tendency today to dehumanize anyone we disagree with.
Well,
and as soon as you do that, you're capable of treating others as products, chattel, disposable.
Yep.
The disposable part's the most dangerous thing too, because that's where this casual killing comes from.
Yeah, disposable means genocide.
It can, but it could also be just on an individual level. I mean, there was a mass murderer this last week who clearly must have thought that the people.
Yeah, sad that.
Disposable. They were real people. They didn't have stories of their own.
Yeah, they become cardboard cutouts.
They could kill.
Yeah, that was a terribly tragic thing. Really awful.
I am sad all the way around.
Yeah.
Including for the person that did it.
Yep, me too.
I think that person was not entirely in control of herself.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of a dementia, maybe even demon issue.
I would say that, but it's also dementia and demon that was hyped up by pumped into a person who was already unstable. It's like taking drugs. It's not going to turn out well.
No, it won't.
Mood enhancing hormones.
Yeah, as you mentioned, mood enhancing hormones, right?
Should have been given treatment rather than encouraged to go more. Yeah,
right. And I liked your response when I was bringing this up about how you thought that pumping them full of mood enhancing hormones could only end one way. It seemed like that's a pretty negative way. The guys at American Mind were focusing more on the response to all this, which is so heinous. Don't talk. Well, the response by networks and politicians, don't talk about the trans thing. Don't talk about any possibility that something wrong. Don't talk about that at all. I mean, you couldn't even mention the fact that the shooter was a trans person. That was forbidden on network television. So, that sort of thing.
It's partly sad that they're saying that, and it's partly scary because it suggests that they also were profiting from this.
That's the bottom line, isn't it? The profit. Yeah.
The color of slavery is not red, it is green.
Yeah. Yeah, it's green. Always has been, or gold, one or the other. Yeah, the fact that when you look at the characters that we were talking about earlier here, the Longstreets and the Stonewall Jacksons, and even the Robert E. Lee, who also was against slavery, they themselves have now become vilified by people who want to make slaves of everybody else. Called slave owners because they fought for the Confederacy, or called bigots because they fought for the Confederacy. But the very people that actually wanted to slave
slavery because they fought for the Confederacy.
What?
They're called defenders of slavery because they fought for the Confederacy.
Yeah, defenders of slavery.
In point of fact, the Confederacy defending slavery. I know that it's way more complicated than that. I know that it is truly about the question of who holds the power within a nation. Is it going to all be centralized at the top or dispersed down below? That's a really important question. It just grieves me that the Confederacy nixed that with the question of shall we be slaves?
Oh yeah, no, you're right. It's it was called the peculiar institution, and even as far back as Jefferson was saying this is going to end badly. It can only end in a cataclysm. This is a horrible business. The very fact that they wanted to include it in the things laid at the feet of George III, that he shackled them with the horrible institution of slavery, struck out because the southern states didn't want that mentioned. But it was a fact. They had gotten shackled with it, couldn't get out of it. Yeah.
He put that in because his...
Say again?
Hemmings, who was there with him.
Say again?
He had been talking... Well, his secretary, when he was at the...
Constitutional Convention.
It wasn't constitutional, but where they came up with that Declaration.
Oh, right, yeah.
They called it that.
Okay.
But his secretary was actually his son by Sally Hemings.
Oh, yeah, right. Continental Congress.
The reason he brought Continental Congress, thank you, that's what I'm looking for. The reason that he brought his son was not to humiliate him or anything, but because his son was the only person Jefferson knew who was smart enough and deep enough to be able to talk about these things with him. As an equal.
Isn't that interesting?
John Adams could too, but in his private rooms, he could only talk to his son.
Isn't that interesting?
The story about Jefferson and Sally Hemings is also a very complicated story.
Yeah, right.
Did you say, well, there was such a difference of power, it must have been rape? That's not how it happened.
Yeah, no. No. Did you ever see that great movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis?
Oh, that was so well done.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
And the way they portrayed Lincoln's clarity on this, when everyone else was just short-sighted on the immediate moment.
Yep.
And Lincoln understanding this is the only issue that matters.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. That was a well-done flick. Really well done. Yeah.
One of Spielberg's best.
Oh yeah, that was Spielberg, wasn't it? I forgot about that.
Yeah, no, Spielberg's done some very, very good movies in time. And I rank that one up as one of his top ones.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the whole thing about the Civil War to me is it was a fascinating moment in history here in America because there was no easy way to get rid of this horrible institution that had affected the nation so much. But it is also interesting to see how those same energies, for lack of another word, those same energies drove people to such violence before and during the Civil War, which are the same energies that seem to be at work now over other issues. I don't know. Did you see this? What was her name? Posey Parker, I think, was her stage name. This woman in Australia that was mobbed.
And she was which I find it odd that she would be mobbed because normally people would say that she belongs to their camp. Well, apparently not.
Apparently not. Yeah, she's a splitter, right? A heretic.
She was just saying that women are women and men are men, and you can't really change that. And in any other age, people would have been like, "Oh yeah, that's common sense." And
well, maybe it's
like you're crazy.
Yeah, and then the stirring up of the crowd against her was really amazing to me. It was very much like, I think as somebody was saying, it was very much like the witch hunts, where people were stirred up to hunt down witches in Scotland and England, and then in America too.
Yeah, in America,
but
we say, "Oh, the Salem witch trials, they were so terrible, and it was so long ago. We would never do that."
Yeah, right. Yeah, same business. It's the same human nature because it doesn't ever change, does it? Yes, and those sorts of things seem to be happening on an increased level right now, it gives me a great deal of trepidation or worry. So.
Well, I try not to worry about it because I look at this and I say that in some way we are still in the hands of God.
Oh yeah.
And this is just something that has to play itself out.
Yeah.
By the way, that my Natty Carter clothing has changed to green.
Yes, it's green. It's very nice.
But as speaking as the voice of God right now, right there,
yes.
we see this time of great fear in front of us. It is a fearsome time. But God will not abandon us into darkness.
Yeah, I agree.
You and all these
I agree.
And, well, I'm glad you agree. Do you notice that there are stories, whether they say it's directly or not, are all coming with the theme of we are abandoned, it is already lost, here's the chaos, I want to laugh at it.
Who is doing that?
It's the flavor of kinds of news stories. It's like despair. It's already over.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree on that score. But that's, I see. I know that news stories do that because they are basically an entertainment industry. This is something that Neil Postman points out. News media in all forms, whether it's conservative or liberal, is an entertainment industry. As such, they have to gin up this sort of sense of despair and chaos and hopelessness in order to have viewers keep coming back to them for more. I recognize that. It's like clickbait or something. So absolutely they have that vision. Even on the conservative side, people that proclaim to be conservatives, they gin up the fury, and they gin it up as though this is the worst thing ever, and it's never going to be fixed, it's never going to be changed, and basically, like you said, we're abandoned, we're alone. That's all there is. And also, this is another thing which is interesting to me about that whole entertainment industry is they operate as though it's never been this way before. Like somehow this is all new. It isn't, and either side saying that is just they're saying it for ulterior motives because it's not new. I mean, it takes a different form, or it's used, it's manifest through different technology, but it's not new.
It doesn't even take a different form precisely. It does take technology, but the way people are acting, no, it's not different.
Yeah, because it's human nature. Human nature stays the same. Now I don't intend this to be a segue into this, but I got to segue into this because this was such an interesting thing. Okay, there's several interesting things that I sent your way. There was the talking plants, which I don't know if you saw that.
I saw that as well. I read all the way through that.
There was the foam, the quantum foam.
That part I didn't read because I already known it before.
Okay, and then there's this other thing, the Kabiri. Did you see that?
Kabiri.
The Kabiri or the Kabiri? You ever heard of them?
No. Tell me about this.
I hadn't heard of them until today, so we're in the same boat. Okay? This is the Kabiri or Kabiri, and apparently there are two movies made with this title. One is called Kabiri Nights, and the other one is just called Kabiri. And they're both like semi-pornographic films coming out of Italy. One in 1914 and one in 1950 something. But don't look those ones up. But the one to look up...
We're not going to.
Yeah, don't look them up. They're probably lousy anyway. Bad acting. No, the Kabiri originally were these what are called chthonic deities out of a culture that preceded the Semitic culture. And the Semitic people worshipped the sun and its motions and its power. And the Kabiric people worshipped not the sun, but the Big Dipper, the Great Bear, which is kind of fascinating. They attributed, apparently, the major deities to, it was either two twins, or it was four powers, or it was four sets of two. It varied, in place to place. But one way or the other, they were connected to Ursa Major, especially as Ursa Major rotated around the North Star. Now, we know, obviously, now that it's the Earth rotating, but whatever. The Ursa Major rotating around the North Star, then, was depicted by the Kabiric people as a hooked cross, which we know as a swastika. But that swastika image showed up all over the ancient world, all the way to the Indus Valley.
Yeah, I know that it goes back there to 4000 BC, and then just appropriated it.
Yeah, very old. And well, that's another interesting piece of this, because the Nazis appropriated intentionally, because they actually they financed digs, archaeological digs in the Middle East especially, in order to find a culture that preceded Semitic culture. Because the Nazis actually saw Semitic culture and its offshoot, which is the Christian culture, as a corrupted form of religion. And that had emerged, that whole thought process had emerged out of the spiritualism of Madame Blavatsky and others, who were already beginning to delve into these origins of religion things. And there's two ways you can delve into origins of religion. You can either say that the earlier stuff was real and the modern stuff is terrible schlock garbage, right? And we should abandon it, cling to those older things instead. Or you could say that the modern form is an iteration of the older and is just as valuable because it's speaking about things that are real beyond our ken. I go with the latter myself. But so that it doesn't...
And that is also the church's position.
Yes, exactly. And so it doesn't impede one's current Christianity or Judaism to see that these things emerged from a long history that preceded them. Because Neolithic people were not Christian. Sorry. They were not Jews. Sorry.
It would have been very difficult for them to...
Yeah, very difficult. So you have to say, okay, well, where did these symbols that we use to express whatever it is that we're dealing with, where did they come from? If we look at it legitimately, which is not the Madame Blavatsky way, by the way, if we look at them legitimately, we say the symbols we have now have very ancient origins, and they go way, 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 way back. And what we are dealing with now is like a child of those things, but it needs to be honored just as much. What the Nazis did was they said, filthy Jews and filthy Christians too, we want to find something that will undermine that and will be a revivification of the earlier universal cult, which was Norse as well as Middle Eastern, because it was all over Europe.
Secret hidden knowledge.
Yes, secret hidden knowledge, right.
I bring that up because our mother pointed out to me that the Freemasons, who've always claimed to have secret hidden knowledge, like to take people's symbols and say, well, this is actually secretly ours all along. Speaking of which, I'm going to jump off of here onto what is a Freemason symbol places upon the top. Just missed it.
Interesting.
Do you see it?
Yep.
This one that I'm standing on is probably accidentally. I don't think the game is a Freemasonic game. It's supposed to be this world that we are standing in, a Freemasonic world. But what I'm standing on is a symbol that's appropriated as the meaning of the circle within the circle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I suppose you could go so far and say
it's light radiating away from it.
It's 16 all total, so it's sort of like the round table. But see, this is the thing, okay? That's so fascinating to me. When you read things like the Arthurian literature or the Christian imagery, or at least until recently, and Jewish imagery, and even Greek and Roman imagery, they're all of them, they have their differences, and that's what's really important, I think. But they have similarities because they're all dealing with powers that be, and they're expressing those powers that be as best they can. Here in the Kabiric tradition versus the Semitic edition, you've got two groups of people, one preceding the other, who are worshiping celestial bodies and expressing that worship in their art, but they're different bodies. The Jewish people acknowledged that there were other deities besides Yahweh, besides the solar power of Yahweh. But the Kabiric people also did that too. They just said that the sun was not as important a deity as this other thing, which was the constellation of Ursa Major. And whatever that tradition was, it got snuffed or got bowdlerized or got glossed over until it became a mystery religion, even by the time of the Greeks, the Hellenistic Greeks. The Hellenes, not the Hellenistic, the Hellenes. So the Hellenes brought in a different type of worship, apparently, that wasn't Kabiric. And that type of worship with their pantheon of the Olympic gods especially gives acknowledgement to the Kabiric entities and incorporates some of them, but generally speaking, it supplanted it, took it over. And for the Greeks, they took that Kabiric tradition and they incorporated it into their own mystery cult, which is kind of interesting, which seems to have been the Eleusinian Mysteries. Okay, the Eleusinian Mysteries.
So, like the bringing in of Dionysius, Apollo, and Artemis actually comes from the Kabirians?
Yeah, it seems to have
or
been.
Am I mixing up a different tradition?
No, the tradition of Eleusis is Demeter, Persephone, Hermes, and Hades. Okay? The one you're thinking of, which is Artemis and Apollo, is actually more closely related to, if I'm understanding, Orion, the constellation Orion, and it has a Hellenistic tradition that is connected to a older cult that had been there already. So, for instance, you see earlier depictions of Artemis. She looks like a pine cone, or she looks like a goddess with many breastesses, the many-breasted goddess. But then when the Hellenes conquered, she was transfigured or transformed into a goddess of the hunt, a goddess of the forest. So no longer this goddess of fertility, but a goddess of hunting things, strangely enough.
Okay, that's right. She was many-breasted because she was the lioness.
Yes, right, exactly. She was depicted as a lion. But the four deities of this cult, the Kabiric cult, and I'm just reading here from the article, Axiros, Axiakerasos, and Cadmilos, apparently are associated, at least according to Chisholm and Karenyi, who are two 20th century mythologists, or what do you call them, archaeologists, mythologists. They're associated with Demeter, Persephone, Hades, and Hermes, respectively. And those four gods are the gods of the Eleusinian cult. So it seems that whenever this cult was, this mystery cult, which had gone underground when the Hellenic, with the Hellenes invading, with the Greeks invading, this Kabiric cult still existed in its more or less original form in some places. But in other places, like Eleusis, it had been glossed over into Greek cult, the Eleusinian cult of birth, death, rebirth. Because Eleusis was a resurrection cult. And the reason that they worshipped the Ursa Major was because the Ursa Major constellation, as it rotates around the North Pole, delineates the turn of seasons, and so therefore death and rebirth, right? And the swastika, if you were to map out the movement of the Ursa Major around the North Pole, it makes basically a hooked cross, a swastika.
Yes,
Nazis who wanted to make this eternal cult, this eternal regime, the what did they call it? The dynasty that would last 1,000 years.
The Third Reich.
The Third Reich. That's what it was. Yeah, Third Reich. They intentionally grabbed that symbol and others, including the eagle. They grabbed it in order to use it to represent the fact that they were revivifying all this stuff based on Lana Blavatsky. So it was really fascinating stuff, and it kind of goes in with what Cameron Thompson and I were talking about the gods and the nature of gods and how people use imagery to represent the gods. Fascinating stuff. This sort of talk for me is very valuable, but it also is dangerous to some degree because it inevitably ends up with somebody calling into question the veracity of any religion or cult. Do you know what I mean?
I do understand that, and that's always the danger, because you get to this point, you think, well, if they're equal, then none of them are true.
Yes, it's all equal and equally bullshit.
Or they don't. Yeah, they're all equally true as well.
Yeah.
And that is dangerous.
It is dangerous. Yeah, it's very dangerous.
Was rejected.
Yep, it's dangerous because you fail to see what the cult, whatever we call it, what the religion is actually espousing. So for instance, like with the Semitic cult, okay, I am fascinated by the fact that Genesis, which is sort of the beginning of a series of stories that they tell over and over again in the Old Testament, Genesis makes an explicit point about the number 7. And I know that that might be a later edition, a 6th century edition, but it may be much older too. They bring in various older stories in order to make their point, but 7 is a number that comes up again and again. And explicitly it comes up in the days of creation, 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. But then it comes up again later on with the character Lamech, who says that he is if Cain, who murdered his brother Abel, if Cain is avenged 7-fold, Lamech is avenged 77-fold. And then later on it says Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence that it keeps coming up.
No, it's not a coincidence at all.
Our father wrote rather extensively on this, but he could never get anyone to publish his work.
Yeah, I think I've got a copy of it somewhere.
Oh, do you? Oh, good.
I'll see if I can send you a copy. He
No. He left me a copy too.
Oh, he did? Okay, good. I've not read through it all.
I was actually going to offer to send you a copy.
Yeah, catch me, Daddy.
I'm sorry. I was
Butterfingers.
crossing myself at that moment. Here, bless you.
No, he did write extensively on it, and I don't know whether Daddy. There's something odd about our dad. I don't know whether or not he had the stomach to take it to its ultimate conclusions. I just don't know. I think he shied away from it because it did prove a threat to some degree. I mean, look, if, for instance, the religion of Christianity has its roots way back, because it is possible you could say that Christianity has its roots in Neolithic religion. That is possible. But if so, the temptation is to say that it's all equally bullshit. That it's not actually connected to anything. That's a temptation. I don't have that myself, but I know it's a temptation.
No, but you do have to go through a point where you have to wrestle with that and come to some kind of answer. Yeah. I do know that our father actually had come to an answer about that. He and I spoke about this.
Is that right?
A little bit before he died.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. That a lot of it we take in our Christian mythology don't go with reason.
Yeah.
They don't. Unless you accept that because they happen, therefore they are reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to predict it from not rationality, as used by the Enlightenment word rationality.
Oh yeah.
They don't work.
No, absolutely right.
And he brought up to me explicitly the virgin birth. If it ever happens in nature, he pointed out, it's always a girl. And so you have to accept, are you going to accept the truth of the virgin birth or not? And the answer that you come to about that will determine whether or not in the end you decide that you are going to believe in God or not.
So in nature, parthenogenesis basically results in a female.
Yes, a female who is always a clone of her mother.
Okay, so here's a question along those lines. And I don't, by the way, what you said is very valuable. I'm not discounting it, it's just my brain is ADHD and goes off in tangents. If that's the case, setting aside the reality of the birth of the Christ, okay? What were the gospel makers saying when they said that the virgin gave birth to a son? I know they were reflecting back to the prophet, right? But the prophet himself was saying, basically, when you read the passage, this is the prophet, is it Ezekiel? Or is it Elijah? I forget whether it's Ezekiel or Elijah.
Neither, it's Isaiah.
Isaiah, okay, sorry. I knew it was one of those guys. When the prophet Isaiah says,
Ezekiel, they all sound alike.
They do, don't they? When the prophet Isaiah says that the virgin shall be great shall give birth to a child, a son, he's making the point that whatever it is that's going to happen is going to be so unlikely that it will be as though a woman gave birth to a son. Okay, so we take it now as being a foreshadowing of what comes later in the birth of Christ. But the original context was that virgin over there will sooner give birth to a son than whatever this thing is, the repentance of your heart or whatever it is. But why would he make that claim unless he knew that parthenogenesis happened with females, generally speaking? See? And I wonder if the same thing isn't being said in the New Testament too.
Unless what he was also saying was, don't look for the thunderclouds and the lightning. Look for something that will appear ordinary, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Appear as ordinary as pumpkin pie.
That's a possibility too.
Except, of course, you wouldn't mention pumpkin pie.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. But to say, for instance, that this thing will appear ordinary, but in fact it isn't, because parthenogenesis never occurs with males. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. In fact, as a question of parthenogenesis, it's a weird thing because it looks as mundane as anything. A woman gives birth to a child. It happens all the time. But it will be extraordinary.
Yeah, I can see that. See, this is the thing that's really fascinating to me. Sorry, what?
I said, and if you blink, you miss it.
Yeah, and if you blink, you miss it, because it comes down to an attitude to some degree, I think. It comes down to the attitude of whether or not the world is a lifeless machine that operates in the same way all the time, and nothing new can surprise us, and we can dominate that. Or the world itself is full of surprises and never ceases to amaze us, because it points to a greater power or order structure that we only dimly glimpse, and we need to respect that and honor that.
We talked about that.
We did.
Last week.
I know we did. That's why I'm hinting at it.
Interesting that feel that got control over the world got rid of it so quickly. Whereas those who go out and find delight in the fact that mushrooms are growing in the forest.
Yeah.
It is a miracle, actually.
Yeah, it is a miracle.
I know they grow in the forest, but it's a miracle.
Well, like Cosmographia. Okay, Cosmographia, the podcast, I've mentioned that before, but they were making a really interesting point today about carbon. Okay. Carbon, they were saying carbon is a very strange substance because there's a god-awful amount of it on the Earth, first off. But most of it is locked up in stone and in the ocean. And the ocean operates as a carbon sink. So the ocean is always taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and the carbon is then released by heat, the sun, or else by tectonic movement or volcanism. And without the carbon, everything would die. Whereas without the same amount of oxygen or nitrogen, it wouldn't affect anything at all. So I think it was like 0.000003 amount of carbon removed from the atmosphere, it would kill everything. So they were making the point that carbon is this amazing material, and life comes from it. So like trees, for instance, they don't grow straight up from the ground the way we think they do. They apparently... You're laughing.
Well, so I'm laughing because you're talking to me, and I do know this because...
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. You know this. Eh? So carbon's apparently... trees apparently... They eat carbon essentially from the air, and they grow bigger because of that. Which is, like I said in a post, I think to you...
Air going through plants to animals, maybe.
Well, I'm getting there. Hold on a minute. They eat carbon from the air, and the tree grows bigger, which is a little bit like the way crystals form. A little bit. At least it seems to me. Not exactly like crystals, but a little bit like it. And
the tree is millions of times more complicated than crystal, but yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. But I raised the question in my post on Facebook, first off, how do you move from crystal to living matter like trees? Because some people suggest that that's where living matter comes from, the inanimate matter people. How do you move from that to that? I mean, if you've got crystals of basalt or whatever it is, they stay crystals. They don't just get up suddenly and become dogs or trees. So how did that happen, right? Now, either you can say, well, it's a mechanism we just haven't discovered yet, but given enough time and resources, we will, and we'll dominate it. Or you say, geez, that's a mystery, and a marvelous mystery, and beautiful, and I'm going to respect the hell out of it. You know?
I'm going to go on the mystery, and I'm going to put something out here for you and hopefully anyone else that listens to this that I hope will blow their minds. There is a very fundamental difference between the crystal in the rock and the crystal that is you, Cat, or the actual components in the rock get there and they stay there. They don't go anywhere. You look like you're stable. You look like your body is an unchanging thing. The tree looks like it's just growing, but the parts that got there, they look like they stayed there. But in fact, for the tree and for you and for anything else alive, not true at all. The actual atoms that are in your body are recycled pretty quickly in the space of about no more than 10 years. Every part of you, every atom, with the exception of your teeth, will be replaced and recycled and something else put into the same position.
That's wonderful.
It happens in such an ordered fashion that it looks like you didn't change. Like you've got a scar on your eye.
Yeah. How I got this is a secret. How? That's another scar.
The scar material will be recycled out. It will change in just a couple of years. The actual scar matter will have been replaced, but it will keep the shape. And I find that astounding.
That is astounding.
That we are in constant equilibrium with the world.
Yeah. Yes. Equilibrium. That's another piece there too, which was part of this series of articles I was sending out. Equilibrium in the world. Okay. The other article was the one that I sent you about the foam, the quantum foam. And you say you've heard of this before.
Oh yes, I have heard of the quantum foam.
Okay, can you explain it to me and to the general audience then? Because I would do a poor job of it. I just read the article today. It was on Wired.
There is it's called a law in physics. It's called the conservation of matter. And another one is called the conservation of energy. Conservation of matter, just the actual amount of the mass doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And the conservation of energy law states that the actual amount of energy doesn't change.
Mm-hmm.
And at our scale, like human size, the conservation of matter appears to be true. But at the subatomic scale, it's not true.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that is true is that energy never changes. The total energy of the universe never changes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. You get down to the subatomic level, and the energy gets to decide what form it's going to take. And it doesn't matter what form it takes, as long as it never changes. And so you get down there, and every once in a while, you will get matter just appear. A piece of matter and a piece of antimatter will just appear, go out in opposite directions, come back, hit and jump from another form of energy. And this is happening all the time.
Wow.
This constant creation, destruction, and recycling is happening all the time.
On the subatomic level.
So if you think you're out in an area where there's nothing, like a total vacuum, if there's energy, then the matter still keeps appearing, disappearing, transforming into something else, over and over again.
And that's what they refer to as quantum foam.
That's what we're referring to as the foam. The area they think is empty space isn't. It's filled with these little squishy stringy things that are there and then not there.
Wow. That's amazing.
I think that's amazing.
It is amazing. It's amazing because it really it really suggests that there is a connection between everything in the entire cosmos, first off.
Mm-hmm.
And second, it suggests that the material that we see that's so, as we permanent or apparently permanent, is not permanent, it's in flux. And it may be that the material that we see around us might not have existed and then popped into existence. I don't mean like a tree suddenly appears, in your front yard.
No, I know what you mean. The idea that as you move across a room, it might not actually be a continuous motion. You popping in and out.
Yeah.
If we're going to stick just to science, popping in and out of positions that are allowed by the energy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's mind bending. And if, for instance, that's the case.
Also probably the case.
If that's the case, we're talking about a material world that has form and structure, and yet may be based upon a form and structure that is not material. In fact, if we are believers,
it's a form of structure that keeps defying your ability to control it.
Yes.
Absolutely
Right.
It refuses to absolutely be there.
Yeah, but it is a form and structure that, if we're believers, we say that's what we're talking about when we say logos. That's what we're talking about when we say gods.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just dwelling on that for just a minute because it's an amazing thought. Language is a funny thing. We give a thing a name and then we think we have it in a box. Demeter.
And then it was not in the box.
It's not in the box anymore. Schrodinger's cat is not even there.
Cat got out.
It's running amok around the universe.
So Schrodinger assumed the cat had to be either alive or dead because he kept saying it's in the box. But what if it was never in the box?
It was never there. Schrodinger's like this guy, magician. He's a magician.
May I recommend being careful where you go? It seems to be a hole there or something.
Where are you?
I just fell through the floor. Now I'm standing in the middle of the air. This is a miracle. I'm walking on air right now. Can you walk to where I was?
Yeah, but I'll fall through the hole. I don't want to fall through
That was
the
a miracle as well.
I was going to talk to you about black holes. That was the next thing on my agenda.
Well, they do apparently just appear every once in a while.
All right, well, let's check it out. Let's just check. Ah, God!
Hey there, it's a miracle. You're also standing in midair.
Yeah, but how do we get out of here? Now we're not even on top of a tall building. We're just like in the Matrix somewhere. Hey, Wes.
I don't have a good answer for you on that.
Did anybody do any quality control in this game? Oh, well, whatever.
I have a feeling that this world we're in is not real.
What? Blasphemer!
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't even cut you.
Yeah, I don't know. What's up? So that brings me to the question of black holes, right?
All right, talking about black holes, which we seem to be in one
Well,
now.
really? Okay. The main question I have with black holes is, what the hell?
No freaking clue. There you go, that's the answer. No idea.
There are two things that came up this week in my feed, my scrolling through the net or whatever it is, which were absolutely mind-bending to me. One was that the biggest black hole ever was discovered. These things are so massive. It's almost hard to fathom just how big the dang thing is. And so immediately I'm asking, how does that happen? How do you get... I mean, I know you get a black hole from the collapsing of a star, blah, 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 but that's a pretty damn big collapse. This thing, in comparison, the largest star in the universe is like a speck compared to the size of this black hole. It's immense. So what is going on there? And then the second thing is, I don't know if you heard this, there was a recording of the sounds that were emitted from a black hole. And it's terrifying. Did you hear this?
I have. I've actually heard a number of these outer space sounds. I don't find them terrifying. I find them as if they are singing.
Well, there is that. I agree. It is singing. The singing of the black hole, I thought, was terrifying. because it sounds like so many tortured souls. It was like, there is recorded evidence now that the planets all apparently sing, and that stones themselves vibrate even on our planet and emit sounds. That's apparently on record. But to hear the sound that emerges from the black hole, it's like maybe that's where all the souls go when they die. I don't know.
I hope not.
I hope not too. I mean, nobody seems to know what a black hole, all the details of a black hole. But if, like, going back to our question of matter and our question of quantum foam and all this, and the emergence of things, especially life on a strange planet like our own, isn't the black hole something like a tear in that fabric, or like a hole in that fabric? Or is that just that nobody knows?
One, but not only do I not know, I know that nobody knows. It's across what's called the Schwarzschild radius of a black hole, where you can't get out again. And you lose the ability to say what distance means anymore.
Wow,
or
okay.
what time means anymore.
Yeah.
If you were falling into the black hole, you would never know when you were getting there, because the time ceases to have any meaning as you get there. And so you can't say you're falling without time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It just hurts my brain. My cat brain is hurting.
And it will.
And I wonder,
my superior human brain to your cat brain.
Even there it hurts. I wonder if this is pure speculation on my part. I wonder if the human brain, or even the cat brain, was designed in such a way that it can't actually conceive of certain things. That there's certain things that when you start thinking of them, they really do hurt your head. It's like in the movie Pi, by Darren Aronofsky, great movie, where they suggest that contemplating certain mathematical principles actually drives you insane. Now, is it truth? I don't know, but that's an interesting thought.
Have you ever tried to contemplate what zero is?
Yeah, no, that's a mind bender right there.
If you just think of a hole, I'm sorry, you're not really thinking about what zero is.
Mm-hmm. It's like trying to contemplate.
My mind recoils from the idea.
It's like trying to contemplate the world after you die. Contemplating your consciousness before you were born and after you die. It's almost impossible to actually do.
I'm sorry, Dave, I can't allow you to do that.
That's right. Commander Bowman, I'm afraid I can't. So are there things then that when we do contemplate them or think about them, they end up driving us nuts? I think there are things like that. I think that there are people that have gone nuts by ideas, not just by drug use or what have you, but by ideas. I mean, take for instance, one small example, trauma victims. You go through a certain amount of trauma, even if it isn't physical trauma, psychological trauma, and it could drive you bats, right?
Yeah.
So, if
people that like to stare at that for a long time.
Oh man, I know. What on earth? There is a point where you have to say, hey, turn away from it, right? Turn the internet off. Look away from whatever it is that you're looking at, and go out and smell the grass, or grip the carpet with your toes, as it says.
You can't do that right now because you're in the frozen land. They always say go smell the grass.
Yeah, no, I can't. I'm trapped.
I think I've come to the end of what's allowed in this.
This is a very interesting little thingy. And that brings me to the next thing, from black holes to this thing, because that brings me to the next thing. Okay, we think of the world as inanimate matter, or we think of plants as dumb creations, and human beings as being the paragon, blah blah blah. But what about this article about plants talking to each other? Did you see that?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that they're doing it, because one gets it. If one doesn't even get to the spiritual level, the fact that they are making noises, they're doing it for real, especially since it's not just spiritually making noises. They even found a mechanism by which they're doing it too.
Yeah, and recorded it.
And recorded that different types of plants use different sounds in the same circumstance.
Yeah.
was like, hey, that means something.
That means something. Well, we were talking last time when we were talking about the mammoths getting swept away by that sea of mud. We were talking about how the science world especially is very almost, what do you call it? Not sheltered, that's not the right word. They circle the wagons over things. They're clannish.
Yes, they do.
Very clannish. And when you,
Clannish is the right term for it.
yeah, and when you think about a certain thing in a certain way, it's hard to get out of thinking of that way and think of it another way. So there are these cataclysmic moments in scientific history, archaeological or whatever, where people make a breakthrough. And the initial response is, that's crazy. You're nuts. You know, what a quack you are. But then it turns out to be true. And whatever that thing was that what people were being vilified for originally, all of a sudden becomes accepted, like plate tectonics, right? Nobody thought plate tectonics was a thing.
Was Hutton vilified for that originally?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was silliness. That didn't happen, plate tectonics. That was silly.
Very interesting.
Or the deluge there, Lake Missoula.
What deluge?
The Lake Missoula deluge. You know, that original proposal.
I don't see why that one would have been so controversial, but apparently it must have really crossed some lines that people thought, I must defend against this or I shall die.
Yeah.
What's so threatening about the notion that 10 to 12,000 years ago there was a catastrophic flood?
Well, I think the humans are complex, okay? And so if it wasn't that people had lots of money invested in talking about this thing in one way, or if it wasn't prestige or power or honor, you know, your chair at Harvard as a science, professor, that kind of thing, or whatever. If it was, you know, something like that, if it wasn't something like that, then you got to account for the idea that human beings also are timid. We're a very timid race to some degree. And actually contemplate things like another planet slamming into our planet, for instance. Or
it's a scary thought.
It is a scary thought. Or the Siberian traps happening again. Or raising of the temperature of the ocean that would release chemicals into the air, you know, that would cause an ice age again, like Snowball Earth. To contemplate those things, I think, is a really daunting task. You know, talk about ideas that drive you nuts. If you dwell on it, you contemplate it, which you have to do in order to study it, it can really hurt you. And I think people are afraid of that. So if you're talking, okay, here's a deluge that occurred with Lake Missoula, how many others happened before that? And could it happen again?
And the fear of, could it happen to me now?
Yes. And not just me, but everybody I know. And everybody on the planet. That's a really scary thought, right?
It is a scary thought. It's why plague is such a frightening concept, just because that's the flood that we see these days.
Disease, plague, yep.
All the other floods.
Yep.
Plague, or the asteroid hitting, or the robot revolution that's going on.
The robot revolution. Yep.
That's another one. I do think it's bad to try and create artificial intelligence, but that's entirely different.
Now, I don't want to be too tangential on it, but why? Why is it bad?
Because it will be done for the sake of trying to control, and then we will discover that it is not control that either.
That's the rub, isn't it?
Now, David Brin wrote. He's a science fiction author, and he actually wrote a novel once where he actually talked about this. He said that our fear over this is probably also over, because even without the control, the most likely thing is that something like artificial intelligence, out of our control, would go through an adolescent stage before it becomes normal like everything else.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. So you were saying that it's control of the machines by humans.
Yeah.
That's
we discovered that we're controlling things at all.
Yeah, that's legitimate. And of course, that's a hard discovery for anybody to make about the world in general. Control, as the Buddhists say, is an illusion. And I think there's something that we have to reckon with on that statement. My fear of control is slightly different from yours. My fear is not that the machines are going to get out of control and become Skynet, and we'll have Terminator, though there is an element of that. My fear is that it will inevitably devolve into those who have money and power and make the machines, and those who become addicted to and are enslaved by the machine. That's the control I worry about.
Which is what we were talking about, I believe, 2 episodes ago.
That's right. That's right, because
incidentally, you'll be pleased to know that's also what David Brin was saying. The real.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Well, I mean, Cardinal, when you think about it, any technology that we have ever invented, has inevitably been expropriated by the wealthy or made people wealthy, and has sure benefited people. Some has benefited people, but benefits them to the degree that they can pay and the degree that they have status. It's not that every technology is bad. It's that every technology has the potential for increasing the power of the powerful and increasing the slavery of the enslaved. Whether that's the water wheel or TikTok.
And because human nature has never changed.
And will never
every
change.
New technology will keep doing it. It
Yep.
will not change.
Did you ever see the series Altered Carbon?
Altered Carbon. I remember the name.
It's on Amazon.
Remind me something about it.
You would like this series. It was done in the style like Blade Runner, but not as grimy. In Altered Carbon, the idea was that in the future, people have discovered a way to transfer human consciousness elsewhere. So you can transfer it to a computer, satellite, or to a cloned body. And the very, very wealthy not only kept clones of themselves in reserve, but they also would transfer their consciousness to satellites on a regular backup, a regular basis, so that if they ever got murdered, they could download it to a new clone body and thus be immortal. They also indulged in all kinds of perversions that come along with being able to transfer your consciousness to the opposite sex, or a dog, or whatever it is.
We talked about this one two episodes ago.
We did.
Too. I remember this.
We did. I thought it was a fascinating program. It was very risque. It had a lot of skin, a lot of sensuality, violence. But I have a very thick cat skin against that. So violence to me is like, all right, I can handle a lot of that.
Violence is used by the church.
Yes. Bring it on. Yeah. Woohoo. Trapped in this.
I have more violence.
So, my point is that with AI technology, the creation of AI technology, and ChatGPT and all that it's not going to suddenly come self-aware and decide to annihilate all humans, although it might, but rather that it's going to be something which will continue to be used by people that are already in power against those that are not. So that's my main fear. But go back for a minute or two in this conversation, right before that mention of AI. When we were talking about the idea of plants talking to one another and the idea of the foam, the quantum foam, it occurred to me that, again, the world is a much more complex and astounding place than theoretical regular place. Which, again, is an earlier discussion, of course, hubris, right? The pride of a person to think they can control everything. And one of the examples of this that I was also dwelling on was a discovery that was made in 2014. Because there are a lot of things that have been discovered recently which are testimony to the idea that when a thing is discovered, it's normally, people are skeptical about it, and then it becomes normal, becomes accepted. Water on Mars, for instance, or plate tectonics, right?
Doing some of the original studying of the photographs on Mars that was establishing that there had been one water runoffs. It's funny to think how recent that is, because that was 2005 that she was studying that.
Yeah.
That wasn't so long ago.
Nope. This was another study, 2014, of water on Earth. and you may have seen this too. There is a layer in our Earth, apparently, that is below the crust of the Earth, which is about 3 or 4 times as large as the crust. And it's porous like a sponge. And it's not magma, it's not heated rock. It's apparently saturated with water. So much water that we have apparently about 3 times as much water as all the oceans on the surface of the Earth, on our planet.
Isn't that amazing to think about?
It just blows my mind. It's again one of those things. It's like, if I'm not humble in the face of this stuff,
what's on the surface is actually not that deep. Did you know that the liquid water on Jupiter's moon, Europa, is also 3 times the entire surface water of planet Earth?
Wow.
And Europa is so much smaller than you'd think, and yet it's got 3 times more water.
That's a lot of water.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot of water.
That and the fact that we have this thing that's been hidden under us, this extra water reserve hidden under us.
Yeah.
And it's been missed.
Yeah.
Think about it.
No.
There's this real structure of our core. You remember the old pictures in the school wall when we were young? Crust, mantle, liquid core, inner core. Inner core solid. Well, apparently there's structure in the liquid part, and there's more than one inside the inner core.
Yeah.
Being discovered now. Wow.
It's like the rearranging of the model for the atom. For years the model for the atom was all those things orbiting around a central core, and now it's apparently not that at all.
No. It's always very difficult for me to try and explain the model of atoms.
Yeah.
Students who have been given these little bits orbiting like planets, and I'm sorry, that's just not
That's not it. That's not the way it is. Yeah. This thing with the water inside our Earth is absolutely riveting to me because, of course, my mind goes in directions that most people's minds probably don't go, being a cat and all that. And so, for a long time, Earth, it's been said, Earth had life develop in the oceans, right? And emerged in the oceans first, then crawled onto land. What if that's not true, right?
Yeah, I'm in the camp of that may not be true, but go ahead.
What if, and this is, I don't know how to express this, so we're just saying this is science fiction right now. What if life actually emerged in our crust or below our crust and crawled out? And that all these cave paintings even that we've seen, which is much later, I know, than the emergence of life. But all these cave paintings we've seen are not humans discovering a cave and going in. Is it possible that it was humans living in and coming out? And as they progressed out of the cave, creating these paintings. Because you look at, have you ever seen the 3D modeling of the Lascaux cave in France?
Very, very recently. I did just a couple of weeks ago.
It was breathtaking.
I actually didn't know it was separate of an inner complex.
It's so immense. It's so immense. It goes deep into the earth. And they're paintings all the way through the thing. And there are some areas where, if you're a human, you're climbing into a cave even with a torch. There's a place where you cannot have the torch lit, and you have to crawl through that thing at very close space and 90-degree turns. Why the hell would you do that? Right? If you're living on the surface of the earth and it's like sun and grass and trees and wind, and you're like, yay! And there's a cave, you're like, let's go in there, where it will be dark, and I have to crawl on my belly and do 90-degree turns. I mean, that's bizarre. At least to me it's bizarre, maybe because I don't like caves.
Okay, that's probably one thing to get back. But I think that what we were talking about at the beginning provides something for it. You're up on the surface of the earth, and then you hear the gods call to you and say, I need you to come this dark place, abandon the light and take faith. Walk here, and I will be with you.
I love that.
And I think that would draw you in.
Yeah, probably
It
good.
is certain.
Probably good.
That one is definitely something that we're sure about.
Yeah.
But our ancestors also were aware of you, and that isn't.
Yeah, true. True that. So, if I were to write a science fiction book, it might involve somebody living deep in a cave and then crawling out. You know, the sort of an alternate origins of man. And I know in the timeline this isn't possible, but because human beings are much later than this event. But the event of Snowball Earth would be something which you probably wouldn't want to live on the surface. So you can imagine, I know, because humans came much later, I got it. You can imagine a world.
I'm thinking, oh no, because living through any ice age would be so horrible.
Yeah, it would be just rock.
Just imagine Minnesota almost all
Yeah.
the time. Never stops.
Worse, because your Minnesota would be 2 or 3 miles high of ice.
It's a good point. Yeah, Minnesota buried 2 miles under the ice.
Yeah.
Almost.
No. I would choose not life in that case, probably. But what
I would
if,
choose
just
global warming.
science fiction here for just a minute, what if there were creatures that were rational that lived on that planet even during the time of the collapse of the planet when it became Snowball Earth, who actually lived through it, and they went into the caves to survive, and then it was snowed over, so you're living in this community that never emerges, almost like Morlocks from the book of the time
I
machine.
actually can see our distant descendants doing that, by the way.
Yeah.
Becoming, the way the Inuit developed to only eat in a world of ice.
Yeah.
They didn't survive that way. I
Yeah.
can actually see ancestors overcome even the nutritional problem of living only off of what you can feed upon within the caves.
Yeah, because you could find things, I'm sure.
I
Right?
bet you could. I'll bet you can even solve the vitamin C problem.
Yeah. Anyway, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating speculation. It's like the speculation of if you could survive that great cataclysmal flood.
Any of the great apes, any of the great species of mankind that were in the past did any of them
Yeah.
ever move into the caves and never come out? I wonder.
I don't know. For me, it's the same kind of speculation as whether or not there was an advanced civilization that was wiped out by a catastrophe. It's wonderful to speculate about. I don't have the evidence, but it's wonderful to speculate about that.
And it's frustrating that the evidence would have been gotten rid of by nature of how it would have happened in the first place.
Yes.
And so as long as you're holding to Occam's razor, you could never answer that question.
Yeah. Not until, of course, the veil is rent asunder and alternative ways of thinking about things are revealed. I don't know.
When we are taught by the angels.
Yes, right, exactly.
I'm
Well-
impatient. I would actually like to know a few things before.
Yeah, there are a couple other things I'd like to know too. So tell me this.
Also like to do glass prison.
I know we're in a glass prison. We have to find a way out of this thing. I think maybe what the best thing to do is for one of us to actually jack out and then come back in again, because we'll emerge back at the thing, and once one of us is back in, the other can jack out and jack back in. That would be one way to do it. Hey, this conversation's been really good. I'm gonna actually stop the recording, but I thank you for the talk. I think you and I should go and kill zombies, or else do some other daring do that you need to do in order to get achievements. Don't you think?
I agree as well. Well, I always keep the cat. I always enjoy tea.
Well, thank you, Cardinal. I've appreciated this very much.
I should disappear first.
Okay, I'll go first.
We'll see if it's a miracle when you disappear.